Hey, Sarah, Fiona, and Kristen, and now more people are coming in. Um, I just decided to go live today instead of setting it up earlier today. I don't really know why, but it's Jacksonville. We were just down in Jacksonville. What a beautiful beach you have. Lake Tahoe. Have never been there. And here we go, Elaine Benavides from Hampton, Connecticut, and Kristen's here. So it looks like we've got a lot of people here, and I'm going to jump right in because, as you know, I'm trying to do these shorter than I have in the past. And also, we have a wonderful new member of the team who's been cutting these into smaller videos, so you can watch them that way if you'd rather. All right, so I took a look at all of your questions. And I'm going to go in a couple of places, but I'm going to go in a place to begin with that only a few people asked about, but that's really important and really cool. Cool in the historical sense. So I want to talk today about Operation Spiderweb. This was the operation out of the Ukrainian military, the special advisors in Ukraine, special operatives in Ukraine, that put 117 drones into either 4 or 5 airports or military airplane installations deep into Russia, and very successfully targeted those drones at weak points in more than 40 aircraft, bombers primarily, and destroyed about $7 billion, about 34% of Russia's aircraft with these drones. And the reason that I want to talk about that is twofold today. One is that that's a game changer in the war of Russia on Ukraine, but also because it's a game changer in war strategies themselves. This is a really big deal. And when I say really big deal, so you think about the history of warfare, different technologies dramatically change warfare. So for example, in the American Civil War, which is the war I know best, all of the tactics stopped being operative in that war because the United States began to manufacture in high numbers rifles. And the difference between a rifle and a musket is that a rifle actually has inside the barrel sort of a bead that enables a bullet, an elongated bullet, to spin as it fires. And those longer bullets that could spin as they fired were so much more accurate that it was rather like throwing a fast ball versus a knuckleball. And that meant that rifles became far more accurate than they had ever been before. So it's a real game changer. Similarly, the concept of total war in that war changes the way people think about war. Well, in the case of Operation Spiderweb, the reason it matters in the struggle between Russia and Ukraine is this. First of all, in 1994, with the Budapest Memorandum, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia guaranteed to Ukraine protection of its sovereignty, that they would not invade either economically or invade the Ukraine's sovereignty on the condition that Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. It did so, and it was supposed to have this protection of its sovereignty, but Russia broke that in 2014 when it invaded Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. And there's now a bridge to that peninsula called the Kerch Bridge. I'll tell you more about in a second. But so when Russia invaded Crimea, the United States stood behind Ukraine and put sanctions on Russia, started to equip the Ukrainian military, and so on. And that was a bipartisan support for Ukraine after the 2014 invasion. That's one of the reasons that Russia got involved in the 2016 American presidential race, because they wanted those sanctions taken off, and they wanted the incoming American president, if it were Donald Trump, to sort of wink as they tried to take over they did take over the 4 eastern oblasts of Ukraine. So the United States has always stood on the side, since then, has stood on the side of Ukraine. But Donald Trump changed that when he went into office, pretty dramatically changing it on February 28th, 2025, when he had Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky into the Oval Office, and he and JD Vance sort of blindsided him and made it very clear that they were siding with Russia. They kept saying, "You don't have the cards." If you remember that saying, and a lot of people were really horrified that the United States was pretty openly supporting Russia in its attack on Ukraine rather than what we had traditionally done. So in the moment that we're in now, so what happened after that is that Ukraine and European countries began to work together to try and make up the slack that the United States was now, the scope that it was now giving to Russia. But at the same time, Ukraine began to say, okay, to Donald Trump, okay, you want a ceasefire? We're behind a ceasefire. They agreed to a ceasefire. I think it was March 11th. And of course, Vladimir Putin, who is the president of Russia, has simply refused to do that. In fact, he has increased the bombing of Ukraine, both with aerial bombing and with drones, even as he claimed to be talking about a ceasefire with Donald Trump. So Trump has been sort of saying he's frustrated, but at the same time, he's not doing anything to make Russia come to the table to do things like sanctions. Now, interestingly enough, in the Senate, there is a bipartisan move. There are now 80 senators from both parties that are co-sponsoring tighter sanctions or higher sanctions on Russia. But until Donald Trump gets behind it, there's no point to push that forward. So they currently are not. But the reason I just set all that up is that's where things stood until June 1st, when Operation Spiderweb, which is the name of this operation to send these drones into very deep into Russia and to hit military targets as opposed to the civilian targets that the Russians have been hitting in Ukraine. This is a game changer because the United States was not informed that this was happening. And what it did was it illustrated to the Russians that the Ukrainians could bring the war home to them. And you're seeing in a number of places people saying, oh, it's Russia's Pearl Harbor, but it's really not, because America's Pearl Harbor, which was December 7th of 1941, the United States was not involved in World War II when that happened. It got involved. And the timing, I actually did out the months today. It's rather as if America had a Pearl Harbor in January of 1945, when it had already been involved in that war for more than 3 years. So this was a really big sign of Russia's vulnerability. And then today, the Ukrainians hit the Kerch Bridge, not as in such a damaging way, but again, demonstrating that they can hit crucial targets. And those are both very symbolic. The attack on the aircraft was on a Russian military holiday, and Putin always likes to hit things on special days to him. And the Kerch Bridge is something that Putin feels very strongly about. That's sort of one of his babies. So what they were doing for this moment is to say, you might want to get yourselves to the bargaining table, because we got a lot of stuff up our sleeves. All right. So that's why it matters in terms of Russia and Ukraine. But in terms of the war strategy of countries going forward, the drones that the Ukrainians used to hit $7 billion worth of aircraft cost between $600 and $1,000 a piece. Now, you do that math. What this has shown is the extraordinary power of asymmetric warfare. That's when those sides aren't even. And so long as one side is very adaptable, has quick technology, and has really good intelligence. So all of a sudden, all of the countries that have just been pouring their energies into having the most stuff, the most hardware, including the United States, which, the Donald Trump administration wants to put $1 trillion into the US military, much of it into hardware, are looking at the fact that this group of very agile, very secretive, because they didn't let it out for 18 months, operatives managed to destroy almost 35%. And again, we don't know for sure because you never really know the numbers in warfare, and different sides exaggerate or downplay their numbers and so on and so forth. But they demonstrated that with an extremely small inlay of money and the use of technology and intelligence, they were able to have this major strike against a major military power. And that all of a sudden, if you're following this at all today, it's been a fascinating day because all sorts of people who are interested in war strategy are like, we knew this moment was coming, but it's just weird to see it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm calling it out now, is because, again, when you teach the American Civil War, for example, you cannot teach that war without talking about the importance of rifles and of artillery. It changes everything. And you get these different technological moments that change warfare, and this is one of them. So it's I just wanted to call it out because it's a game changer, not only for the geopolitical structure right now between Russia and Ukraine, but also for how countries prepare for war going forward. So I wanted to call that out just so that people are watching that. I'm not suggesting things are going to happen tomorrow, but those of us who are going to be lucky enough to be watching this for the next generation, and I'm obviously not at my age, they're going to write this in the history books as here's a day that really mattered because it illustrated what you can do with technology and intelligence in the modern world with the capabilities that we now have to have, in this case, piloted drones that operated underneath the radars, the air defenses of Russia, because they were able to use intelligence, essentially, and to use the civilian population to deliver those drones to right outside the airfields. If you're interested in this, as you can tell, I am. There are now pictures available from the BBC at the very least. There may be more. Those are the ones I was looking at, of the drones that were actually put inside the roofs of wooden structures, cabins that the Ukrainians had delivered by truck drivers to the sites where they needed them, as if they were actually mobile homes. And to me, to my eyes, they look for all the world like bats nestled in the crawl spaces of an attic. I mean, they're literally drones. They look like drones, but they're kind of nestled in there. It's just as a historian, you can tell I'm sort of gobsmacked to have seen this day, because you don't usually get to watch history change in the news in front of you, and this did. All right. So that you asked other questions, and you've asked a lot of questions about the Republicans' omnibus bill that they are calling the One Big Beautiful Bill. That is literally the name that they have chosen for this bill. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of that again. I did that earlier. I think it was last Thursday as well. But before I do that, I want to start with an observation that in America we don't make very often, and we really, really should. And that's that for all that the Republicans have been screaming since the 1980s that taxes are too high in the United States, in fact, the American system is a very low tax system. And the comparison I'm going to make here is to the other 38 countries in the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. A terrible name, by the way. I have to look up what it stands for every time I want to talk about it. Usually we talk about those countries as the OECD countries. And as I say, there are 38 of them, and they're characterized by having advanced economies, developed economies. And so people, when they're looking at the different systems that people have, they tend to group the OECD countries together. And when you do that, and you take a look at average taxation rates of, according to GDP, because we're all different sizes, right? But you look at the gross product, the amount of economic output of all those countries, and you look to see at what rate they are taxed. The United States is at the very bottom. I think there are 4 countries below us. We're at right now at about, I wrote down the numbers, at about a tax rate of 25.2% of our GDP. Now, the top countries on that list are at a greater than 41% of their GDP, but the average is 33.9% of their GDP. That's the average of these 38 countries. And the reason I point that out is because if in fact the United States got to the average, and remember we're the wealthiest country in the world, if we just got to the average of the OECD countries, we would, which is 33.9%, we would have more than $26 trillion over the next 10 years in revenue. If we got just to that level, not up to the top, just to that level. And while I'm talking about that, I also want to point out that the deficit that we are talking about in our budget, which is the difference between the revenue coming in and the amount that we spend, the deficit in 2023 was $1.7 trillion. Okay, so if we just got to the average, we would have that deficit covered. And remember, we have been there before fairly recently in that it was under Bill Clinton, in the Bill Clinton administration, that in fact we didn't run a deficit. But since we were in the black, we were bringing in more than we were spending. But after that, we got the George W. Bush tax cuts, the unfunded wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and now the Trump tax cuts of 2017. And that's what's put us in the red. I also wanted to call out the fact that the national debt as of April 2025, 2 months ago, was $36.2 trillion, much of which, of course, is thanks to Donald Trump's first term. But as I said, if we just went up to the average of the OECD countries, we would have $26 trillion over the next 10 years. So before I talk about anything having to do with this one big beautiful bill, I wanted to put that out there because we don't talk about taxes in the United States anymore, and we should, because it's the Republican Party that invented national income taxes and what they called manufacturing taxes. And until 1981, if the United States was outlaying more than it was bringing in, the first thing that Congress would do is say, let's take a look at taxes before they went to cuts, although they cut too, but that's really where they started. So now, with that background there, this omnibus bill, the one big beautiful bill, as they call it, that the Republicans are looking at, is a combination of everything the Republicans want. It's like the kitchen sink in there. And many people have called out the fact that it does make it very difficult to enforce contempt of court orders. What is not in the bill that you're seeing everywhere is that it can stop elections. That's not there. There are things that the administration is trying to do to change American elections, but that's not in that bill. It frustrates me when we put stuff out there like that, because if it's in there, people like me haven't found it, and I haven't seen anybody actually be able to point to where that is. I could be wrong, by the way, but that's what it looks like to me. But they put all kinds of things in that bill. But the reason that Trump wanted everything in that bill is because there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. We need to find some way to deal with the budget, which has not actually been funded yet. That's what's in the big, beautiful whatever. We also have the upcoming problem of the debt ceiling, which I've talked about before. That is a holdover from World War I, which says that Congress can appropriate all the money it wants, as it does, but the Treasury can only borrow up to a certain amount. And we hit that limit in January of 2025. And right now, where the Treasury is using extraordinary measures to fund the government, but those extraordinary measures will run out. The Treasury Secretary is estimating now in August, so they have to do something before August. But at the same time, Trump wants to extend his tax cuts. And the extension of the tax cuts, according to the Congressional Budget Office, which is run, by the way, by a Republican, although Trump and Mike Johnson's House Speaker keeps saying they're Democrats. In fact, the director of the CBO is a Republican, and the CBO is kind of the gold standard. They're they've got a great reputation for their economic predictions. The CBO says that extending those tax cuts will cost a minimum of $4.3 trillion over the next 10 years. So when you look at that bill, what it does is a number of things. It has a lot of cuts to the United States programs that a lot of Americans rely on, including cuts to Medicaid. And the Republicans are trying to say they're only getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. But as I wrote last night, that's simply not true. They're getting rid of nutrition programs. They're getting rid of all sorts of things that don't actually save a ton of money compared to the amount of money that they are throwing into those tax cuts and into increasing the budget for Homeland Security and for defense. So one of the things that you're looking at when you're looking at that bill are these cuts to the social programs that Americans need to survive. There's cuts to housing. There's all kinds of cuts in the bill. But those cuts do not make up for the extraordinary tax cuts and the rising investment in the military and in immigration enforcement and so on. So one of the things that people have asked about is, what's going on with that? It passed the House of Representatives, and now a number of members of the House are saying, "Well, we didn't know this was in it. We didn't know that was in it." It passed on a party line vote. That's Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, saying she did not know that it prohibits states from regulating artificial intelligence for 10 years. That's in the bill. Somebody else said they didn't know that it stopped contempt of court procedures. And Jasmine Crockett, who's a Democrat from Texas, said, "Well, I knew about it. We talked about it in the committee. You were sitting there. You can say you didn't know about it, but we certainly talked about it." So they're backing off because they're hearing a lot of people being upset about that. And again, you're seeing Republicans saying, "We're not really cutting Medicaid. We're cutting $700 billion over the next 10 years to strengthen it." Good luck with that. So you're hearing about that bill. It's now going to the Senate, and the Senate is already tearing it apart for various reasons, not least because there are a number of senators who are very vulnerable in 2026, Republican senators who are now trying to back away. And you saw Joni Ernst there, for example, who's also vulnerable, saying, well, yeah, it cuts Medicaid, but people are going to die. We're all going to die. When somebody said, "People are going to die," she answered, "Yeah, well, we're all going to die." That wasn't a very good answer to people's concerns about Medicaid. So you are going to see people pushing back against it in the Senate, and I would urge you, if you care about it, to push back. But one of the things that you asked me to talk about was Musk today, Elon Musk, the billionaire who has been running the Department of Government Efficiency, saying, "I'm going to admit it, I hate this bill." This is a big deal in that what Musk wants is he wants to get rid of all the government programs that most Americans actually like. That's the National Weather Service, Medicaid, all the things that we count on to keep the world moving. Because what he wants to do is get rid of that government and use the revenue from the US government to fund his attempt to get to Mars. And so his idea is to get, remember, he just wanted to cut the government, so that money could be used for his project to get to Mars. Now, that's never what Donald Trump wanted. He wanted to cut the government so he could put his own people into those jobs. And that dovetails much more closely with the people running Project 2025 and with the people who embrace it, like Russell Vogt, who's the he's the director of the Office of Management and Budget. And Vogt is a Christian nationalist who wants a big, strong federal government to force religious rule on the rest of America, including, getting rid of abortion, for example, and getting rid of gay rights and getting rid of all the aspects of the modern secular government that people like him and people like those who are now running Hungary believe have poisoned their country. So this fight over this bill is partly about the budget, but what it's really about is what kind of government are we going going to have? Is it going to be a government that answers to the needs of ordinary Americans, or is it going to be a government that simply creates opportunities for the extremely wealthy to put more of our revenue into their own pockets? And to impose religious rule on us. And that's another thing about taxes always to remember is it's our money. It is literally our money that we elect people to office to determine how we will spend. So when you think about that bill, don't just focus on the individual pieces of it. Think about what you want from your government. All right. So another thing that people asked me to talk about is I'm just going to throw this out there quickly. It is worth watching President Trump. He is mentally falling apart. And it's time to hold his feet to the fire because, when a president posts something like that his predecessor was assassinated in 2020 and it has been replaced by a robot, that's something that's not okay. This is a man who is one of the most powerful people in the world, has his hand on the nuclear football. And I'm really tired of people being like, oh, well, that's just Trump. It's not okay. You would not elect that man to run for, your local transportation department. So why people are shrugging when he is behaving the way he is not okay. But quickly, you also asked me to talk a little bit about the Democrats, which I have not done, I haven't written about, because honestly, part of Trump's nuttiness is that is at least in some part the attempt to throw so much crap at us that we're constantly scrambling. And you will notice if you read my letters, which once again are available for free, both on Facebook and on Substack, what you'll notice is that because I'm trying to keep a record for the future, what you'll notice is they've gotten a lot longer. I try and throw short ones in there, but there's just so much every freaking day. So, I talk about the Democrats more than I write about them because they're not nuts, and it's like, I say, this whole idea of distracting us all the time works because you had to pay attention to all the details if you were running across the savannah, because otherwise you'd get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. I know nothing about paleography, really, so I probably got that wrong, but you get the point, right? So in this moment, one of the things that people have asked me about is, why didn't people talk about Joe Biden being senile when he was in office? And I'm just going to say on that front, if you judge, first of all, in my observation, and I did not spend a huge amount of time with President Biden, but I did spend time with him. I did talk to him. What I always saw was a man with a fairly severe stutter when he got tired, the stutter got worse. But I never saw him unable to answer questions that were not scripted. And to have a really good command of a wide range of material that was important. Now we know, of course, that Donald Trump doesn't even read his presidential daily briefing. So this idea somehow that he was kept hidden he was the president of the United States. Of course he wasn't kept hidden. And one of the things that I look at when I evaluate presidents is, what are they getting done? And the Biden administration was one of the most consequential presidencies in American history. It got major legislation passed. It got major foreign relations stuff done. If you think about that disastrous debate that Biden did, that was when he was negotiating the largest prisoner swap in American history that got back Evan Gershkovich for the United States and all these other prisoners as well. So somehow this idea that there was this great conspiracy and Biden wasn't really doing anything just doesn't hold water for me. I don't care if our president is a disembodied brain in formaldehyde. If they are producing at the rate that the Biden administration was producing, I don't care what the rest of the package looks like. So that's what I have to say about Biden and this idea that somehow should be hell to pay for no one talking about Biden's abilities. I mean, I watched him really closely because, I was one of the few people who actually was reporting on that administration rather than on whatever Trump was doing in that moment. And I just find it enormously frustrating that so many people nowadays are saying, well, you didn't tell us, for example, stuff about the Budapest Memorandum, or you didn't tell us. It was all there. It was an incredibly transparent administration. And, they gave press conferences every day from all the major departments, and it just didn't get any press coverage. So that being said, now when we look at what the Democrats are doing, one of the things, again, that frustrates me is people talk about the Democrats as having doubled down on identity politics and so on. What the Democrats have done is they have permitted the Republicans to define them. So if you look at the Biden Harris administration, certainly when Harris took over in the presidency, the presidential campaign of 2024, she literally never talked about identity politics. She literally never did that. It was the Republicans who pinned that on the Democrats. The Democrats kept trying to talk about kitchen table issues. Now, my impression of that is enormously important to people. As you know, my take on politics is that people need to feel that they are part of something larger, and that, at some point talking about gas prices is really not necessarily going to sway people. And we know, in fact, that it did not, for all that the media insisted that everybody was voting according to gas prices. In fact, it became very clear they were not. So what the Democrats are doing now seems to me to be enormously healthy. Like, I'm unbelievably sick of people sitting there saying, well, this is what the Democrats should have done in the past, because I don't believe in going backward, and I'm really tired of postmortems. But what you are seeing is an increasing number of Democrats and independents and former Republicans. Joe Walsh today, who was a Republican representative, joined the Democratic Party. What you're seeing is them starting to talk about the things that are important to them. And you're seeing it from a lot of different places, a lot of new voices, and a new up and coming voices. And to my mind, people keep saying, we need someone to gather around. I disagree with that. And I'm not a political operative, by the way, so you can discount this. But when I look at moments when there is extraordinary upheaval in a society, I don't really want to see one voice at the beginning. I want to see a lot of voices at the beginning talking about what's important to them, because they start to coalesce and say, okay, if you've got these 15 topics, all of us care about, and you can fill in the blank. To me, healthcare seems to be pretty high up on that list. But, as you know, one of my big things is NOAA, and scientific investigation, scientific research that's being gutted. That might not be your top issue. But the more we hear about these things, the more you will see people starting to examine how they think the country should go into the future. And once we have figured that out, and the definition of what that looks like may not come from a politician, or it may come from a politician you've never heard of. Once we have figured that out, then we will absolutely rally around different leaders who are doing that. And so I'm watching a lot of people really closely to see what they are saying and how they are saying it, and to see the new voices that are coming forward, the younger voices that you may not have ever heard of. And some of the people that I'm watching are not household names yet, but they could become household names. And that's, really interesting to me. So every time you hear a new voice, you hear people saying, well, he's running for office. She's running for office. What politician isn't running for office? They're testing the waters. They're seeing what's out there. That's great. They can do that. We need them to do that. And we need to see who we want to listen to and who we don't want to listen to. And the more we make our voices heard, the more they will get feedback on what they are saying. And we will start to coalesce around one person or another. And then when that moment comes, what you will see is the weighing of different constituencies. And, to go back for a second to Biden and Harris, one of the reasons that I was not keen on Biden dropping out of the race in 2024 was because Biden and Harris worked in 2020 because they nailed together two separate constituencies. And losing Biden out of that, it required Harris to move forward. She obviously brought an older looking, anyway, white man onto the ticket with her to see if they could pick up those same constituencies again. Obviously didn't work. But when you pick somebody at the end of the day, most people don't get their top choices because we're a big country, and you got to put a lot of different voices together into a coalition that enough people can live with that they will vote for it. So in this moment, I am 100% not exercised about there not being one leader of the Democrats. I think it's good that there isn't one leader of the Democrats, because we get to hear a lot of different people, and we get to, more importantly, we get to hear a lot of different ideas. And what I am drawing on here to make this argument is not only the fact that this is how we got Abraham Lincoln, who was a very little known one-term representative in the 1850s, a corporate lawyer who listened to what people were saying and came out of the box and put down all the many rivals for the presidency in 1860, because enough people said, yeah, we can live with him. And we like the kind of stuff he's saying, that he became, obviously this person who defined America in the 1850s. But it's also exactly how we got Theodore Roosevelt, the Republican president in the early 1900s, who rose in a similar moment by listening primarily to Democrats. He took the program of people like Grover Cleveland and the reformers that Grover Cleveland had brought to his ticket in the 1880s and 1890s. So what we're seeing, I think, is that same kind of ferment. Somebody's going to emerge, but, you don't really want a front runner right now to lead a party, because it just makes them incredibly vulnerable. And we don't need a mudslinging fight right now. We need people to focus on what they don't like about the Trump administration and what they would like to see America become. Once again, I'm going to encourage you to do that. Speak to your write and call your congresspeople all the time. Somebody said, does it matter? Are we achieving anything? 100%. If you look at how Kristi Noem has had to back off when the sheriffs went after her statement about sanctuary cities. If you look at the number of times that Trump has had to back off on tariffs, the list is very, very long of the number of times that the administration has felt obliged to back off. Now, it hasn't backed off on some of the most important things. Its attack on the rule of law and on its attack on due process with regard to immigrants coming to the United States, but pressure 100% works. So keep that up, but also talk about what's important to you. Encourage those leaders who are talking about the things that are important to you. Recognize that you do not have to agree with everybody on your team. Because, like I say, we're very much in a period of flux, and we're all supposed to be advocating for the things we care about, and we're not going to get everything we want, but that's how politics works. So advocate for things. Use art. Use your voices. If you are planning to protest on June 14th, do so, but please learn the rules for protesting, so that you stay safe, and that you don't encourage violent resistance to you. There's a number of organizations that are circulating the ways in which to do that. You can also be trained to do that. Make sure to do all of those things. So I'm going to hope to leave you here with some hope going forward. It's summer, lots of stuff's going to be happening, and just with a reminder that I'm going to keep on trying to do these shorter. I went over today. I will be here again on Thursday at 6:00. If you're not reading me, somebody pointed out the other day that I am active on a number of platforms and I don't ever cross-pollinate them. I am available every night. I write a letter about what happened in America that day, tying it into American history. It's available for free, both on Facebook and on Substack. On Substack, don't put in your credit card unless you want to be charged. You don't have to. You get the same thing. You just don't get to comment, and you don't get some of the extras I put out. But that main letter will be available. And for those of you watching me on Facebook, I do have a YouTube channel. And finally, I want to tease something that I'm really excited about. And that's that we've actually been working on something now for close to a year. And we're just about to go live with it this weekend. We are expecting to go live with it unless something big happens in the news. I'm not going to tip my hand any more than that, but I hope you like it. And I really hope you like it. And if you do, there'll be a lot more where that comes from. So look for that over the weekend. I'll mention it again on Thursday, and I will see you then. So thank you for being here. Hey, folks, I'm hoping this has gone live at this point. Glad to see so many people here. We got Missouri, we got Pennsylvania, two people from Pittsburgh right next to each other. I wonder if you know each other. Western Massachusetts. I don't know how you're doing up there, but we finally got summer here in Maine today, and it feels great. I'm actually in a t-shirt, which I don't even remember the last time I wore a t-shirt. Um, Ohio, Montgomery, Alabama, and here are the Facebook crew. So I think we're ready to go. Um, Listen, it's been a day. So I asked for questions that people wanted to hear about, and everybody wants me to talk about the very public breakup between President Donald J. Trump and billionaire Elon Musk, which has been happening on social media this afternoon, which has been very distracting for those of us who are actually trying to get a different kind of work done. But let me tell you what has happened and what sense I make of it. The first thing to remember is how the two got involved. And we know more about this now than we did even 2 weeks ago, because there was an article in the New York Times about a week ago that talked about how in July, Trump privately texted somebody close to him. And the article was cagey about who that was, but texted somebody close to him saying that he was very concerned about the investigations into his business that had been launched by the US government. And there were a number of them, big ones. And he said that those could, and this is close to what he said, take him down. So he started to get involved with Donald Trump, with whom he had not been involved very much previously. And by October of 2024, he was deeply involved in the campaign, appeared with Trump at a rally on October 5th. And that night, he texted again somebody to whom he is close or was close, saying that he was optimistic about how the election was going to go. Now, we know that he put about $290 million into the 2024 election, and that appears to have turned the trick for Trump's election in 2024. So that's where the two of them sort of started to come together. Now, once Trump was elected, if you remember, which honestly seems like a million years ago, but it was not all that long ago. It wasn't 6 months ago. Musk, or I guess the election was 6 months ago, but it was more than 6 months ago, but it really feels like it was forever ago. Musk sort of attached himself to Trump and seemed always to be there. If you remember when there were press conferences, for example, he was the one doing the talking and so on, which led a number of people, including me, to wonder who was really in charge of the White House, because Trump is not somebody who tends to fade. He likes to be the center of attention. So it was funny that he was giving so much attention, or letting Musk have as much attention as he was. Now, the first thing that he did, Trump, is he put Elon Musk in charge of what purported to be an agency called the Department of Government Efficiency. And technically what he did was he hollowed out an agency that was part of the Office of Management and Budget and turned that into the Department of Government Efficiency, and said he was putting Musk in charge of it, although the White House has remained extraordinarily cagey about who really is in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency. And Anna Bowers, who is a lawyer, has been looking at this now for months, trying actually to nail down who is calling the shots at the Department of Government Efficiency. And that matters because a lot of what they have done is quite apparently illegal, and the White House is seemingly trying to dance around it. So there's nobody ultimately to charge. I doubt that's going to last very long. But all that to say that Musk certainly seemed like he was enormously important in the administration, and very much had Trump's ear. Now, there were rumors that they were falling out, but Musk has really felt as if he could do whatever he wanted. So he has on occasion taken public stands against Donald Trump, like over immigration, for example, and now over tariffs. But there had not yet been a public spat between the two of them, although a number of people thought they could see it coming for a number of reasons. Now, that spat happened today. The public spat happened today, and it has been escalating throughout the day, with Musk putting more and more inflammatory things on his social media platform X, which used to be known as Twitter. You do not have to belong to either of the platforms I'm telling you about in order to read them, I don't think. Certainly, I read Donald Trump's social media platform, Truth Social, without belonging to it. I do have an X account, so I read over there. I don't post anymore, but I read. Anyway, Musk has been escalating the fight against Trump throughout the day, and Trump has been replying. And what that looks like has been, for example, Trump saying that he fired Musk, that Musk was losing control, and that he might start to pull government contracts from Musk. And for his part, Musk has been saying that Trump owes him, that he knows that he couldn't have been elected without Trump couldn't have been elected without Musk's help. Trump refutes that. And Elon Musk, after Trump said he would is considering taking the government contracts from Musk, Musk said, okay, I'm going to start decommissioning all of my spaceships. And then he also said, and I'm paraphrasing this, he said, here's the big bombshell I'm going to drop. Trump is in the Epstein files of the pedophile. I've forgotten his first name, Epstein. Anyway, and that Trump's in those files, and that's why they haven't been released. Now, let me walk back a little bit more, though, of what the story is behind this, because that's sort of what exploded today. Now, you got to start with two things. You got to start, first of all, with remembering that these are two of the most powerful people in the world, right there. And that says something about where our country is. You also need to remember that both of them are not in good mental shape. Elon Musk, we know now, had a very bad drug habit during the campaign. The people who wrote an article about that could not confirm that he is continued to have that habit, but certainly a lot of the images of him in the Oval Office, for example, or at Trump's inauguration, look to at least my untrained eye as if he is quite high. So he's got a fairly pronounced drug habit, and Trump is mentally falling apart, and he has been for quite a while. And this, to me, it's just astonishing that this isn't a bigger conversation in our public discourse. But the two of them are both mentally deteriorating, and they are both also accustomed to getting their way and being able to do whatever they want and being the center of attention. So a lot of people are like, well, are they really fighting? Are they not really fighting? One of the things I would urge you to do is not to think about politicians really as being any different than the rest of us, except that most of them really want to be liked. So if you knew these two people and you had been watched these two people in your life for as long as you have, do you think that they could maintain a facade of a fight that wasn't real? And I just don't think they could. So you have to remember that they are extremely powerful people who are both in poor mental states, who are deeply, deeply dependent on each other, and who are each trying to get the upper hand in the relationship. So I think what Musk is doing here is trying to say to Trump, but also to the rest of the Republican Party, because one of the things he tweeted today was to remind people that he's going to be around for 40 more years, and Trump is only going to be around for 3.5. It seems like he's trying to make himself a large player in the Republican Party going forward. And yet, it is also worth remembering that he has been badly damaged by the articles about his drug use, which doesn't look like cute and edgy. It looks like you got a real drug issue. And also, it's important to remember that Musk desperately needs, it is imperative for Musk to have US government contracts. He needs those, and he needs the government not to look into his companies, which pretty openly flout a lot of laws. So for all that he's making this big play to sort of say, I'm the king of this squabble, and make a play for controlling the Republican Party, it's unclear how that's going to play out because a lot of Republicans would certainly like to have access to his deep pockets, but they also recognize that his deep pockets are dependent on the US government, and that might not continue to come through. Now, on the other side of it, Trump needed Musk for his money. He needed Musk to put him over the top in the election. But it's worth remembering that both Musk and Trump have been engaged in what Josh Marshall of Talking Points memo has called a vast criminal enterprise. That is, a lot of what the Department of Government Efficiency did was illegal, pretty openly illegal. And Musk certainly understands the crypto mess that Trump's family and Trump himself have been making money from. So he can spill a lot of that and bring attention to it, and that could quite badly hurt Donald Trump. So watching these two things play out is worth is worth remembering that that there is a contest here for control of the Republican Party, but also for control of American politics. Now, that being said, Musk got from the Department of Government Efficiency control of Americans' data. That's going to be really important because he can micro-target us in future political campaigns. And everybody's going to be watching that because they're going to want that on their side if they can possibly have it. Now, at the same time, it's worth remembering that Russia also significantly helped Trump in 2016. He tried to help him in 2020 and helped in 2024, and once again is meddling in the United States. Now, Russia is much less well inclined toward Trump in this moment. At the same time that Musk is also quite tightly tied to Vladimir Putin, was always talking to Vladimir Putin before the 2024 election. So Russia is also kind of in there, and whether they will side with Musk or whether they will side with Trump or whether they will simply withdraw aid from Trump, it's not clear how that is going to play out. The other piece of this is that for all that Musk needs the US government, the US government also needs Musk because we have relied so heavily on his SpaceX company to get satellites into orbit. We really can't do it ourselves any longer. We don't have the capacity to do that yet, and it would take a long time to replace that. So in this moment, Musk is obviously making the call that the US government is going to need him. So it's going to have to keep him around and keep on his good side to get SpaceX to put satellites in orbit. It's not clear to me either how that will play out because there are a number of ways that the US government could, in fact, take over Musk's SpaceX. We don't tend to do that nowadays, but certainly in our history, the government has taken over imperative national security industries. And there are also other countries that are launching satellites as well, although not at the same rate that Musk can. I mean, we can launch satellites in the US government, just not at the rate that Musk can. One of the reasons that people like me who were so not keen on Musk having the power he did over our satellite capacities is because we don't want to be held over a barrel by one guy. All right, so all of this is going on between these two enormously powerful members of the global sphere, but also of the US government. Now, the other thing that I would urge you to think about in this moment is how gleefully the media is covering this, which says to me a lot about the US media. That is, it is entertaining for sure. Lots of people saying, hey, we've got our popcorn. But this, I think, is one of the ways we have gotten into the problems we're in, that you cannot look away from Donald Trump. And now you can't look away from Elon Musk. And one of the things that I found enormously frustrating about covering the Biden administration was that by definition, Biden was trying not to take headlines. He wanted the presidency to go back to being behind the scenes. And the things that he did got very little coverage. So, for example, one of the stories that came out today was that Under Biden, the IRS said that it would stop auditing small players and start auditing the big players who were cheating on their taxes or not paying their taxes. And a study came out today that said, hey, that's exactly what they did. The audits of high earning payers went way up, and the audits of people who don't have a lot of money went way down. And that's that's something that the Republicans used against the Democrats, saying, oh, if you beef up the IRS, you're going to be auditing everybody. Well, in fact, what the Biden administration said is we're auditing the very wealthy taxpayers who are not pulling their weight. It turns out that that was right. The administration said that, but also now an independent study says that that's true as well. So the fact that we are focusing so much in this moment on Trump and Musk as sort of a cat fight, if you will, is worrisome to me when there is so much else going on. So somebody else is still watching. Something else just happened. I'm not able to watch it obviously right now. So I would like to remind you that while they are doing this, while they're having this huge fight going on, there are in fact other stories that are going on. So the fight over control of the Republican Party has been brewing for a long time. I've been talking about this since before the election, that there are these different factions in the Republican Party under Trump that are fighting for control of it. And one of the things about the Department of Government Efficiency that is really increasingly clear is that what Musk was really doing was he was sucking up as much data as he could from the US government for his artificial intelligence so that he could build better models using our information, sort of turning us into a product, if you will, that he could make money from. In fact, the person who decided where the Department of Government Efficiency cuts were going to come from appears to have been Russell Vought. And Russell Vought is the director of the Office of Management and Budget. Remember, I said that the Department of Government Efficiency, they shoehorned into another agency that was under the Office of the Department of Budget, the Office of Management and Budget. There we go. And that is likely in part because that would then keep it under Vought's control. Vought is a Christian nationalist who wants to enact Project 2025. And Project 2025 is that attempt of about 100 different right-wing organizations to create a blueprint for the 2024 Trump administration that said we would have to create a very strong president, essentially a dictator, and to get rid of the US government, get rid of the secular US government, turn it into a group of loyalists to Trump, and begin to put in place the kinds of laws that Christian nationalists want. Part of that is centering what they call the family, and their version of the family is heteronormative. They don't believe in queer people, gay people, anything other than heteronormative relationships that are headed by a strong father and a subservient wife in order, as they say, to protect children. You can see how they are starting to put that in place with things like the order of Tuesday, saying that the government would no longer enforce the guidance of the Biden administration, that emergency rooms that accept Medicare, which is virtually all of them, have to perform emergency abortions if a pregnant woman appears and needs to be stabilized through an abortion to save a bodily organ or to stop severe hemorrhaging. And they're not going to honor that anymore because they believe that they want to stop abortion to the point that even if it risks a woman's internal organs or her life, they're okay with that. So Russell Vought is still very much in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency, and they are continuing to try and put that into place. You also have the Stephen Miller wing of the party that is, or the MAGA party that is behind the immigration deportations and renditions of individuals to other countries, to prisons in other countries, in third countries, which is not deportation. Deportation is when they send somebody back to their home country, but sending them to prison in a third country is a whole different kettle of fish. Miller has been furious because there has not been enough rendition, enough arrests, enough deportations to make him happy. He wants to increase those deportations from about 600 a day to about 3,000 a day. And he's been putting a lot of pressure on law enforcement to do that. And as he has done that, they have been pulling law enforcement officers off of terrorism cases, off of criminal cases, off of all the things that they normally would do in order to get them to round up immigrants that are, many of whom are here legally. Miller believes in creating a white society, and he wants to get rid of all of those people. And somebody pointed out to me the other day that Trump now talks about getting rid of 21 million people, even though we know there's about 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. And I didn't know where those other people came from. Somebody has suggested that is the American-born children of those undocumented immigrants. So that's an attack on birthright citizenship. So while this fight is going on between Musk and Trump, one of the people who jumped in with both feet instantly was Steve Bannon, the media mogul who was behind Trump's election in 2016, had a falling out with him, and now is sort of back on the MAGA train. And Bannon is all about getting rid of Musk. And he is now saying, hey, just so we're on the same page here, Mr. Trump, remember that Elon Musk is probably an illegal immigrant, is what he called him in his own tweet or something. So that's there too, this fight going on in the Republican, in the MAGA party between the immigration group, the 2025 group, and they work together. But then we also have the tech bros, and the tech bros seem to be at this point represented by Musk. But of course, JD Vance is very closely allied to Peter Thiel, who is another tech bro, and they also want to destroy the US government. In their case, not only because they want to get rid of all the secular pieces of the American government, but also because both Thiel and Vance want to impose Christian nationalism on the United States. It's such a mess, man. If you wrote this in a novel, nobody would believe it. All right. But here are the other things that are going on that people are not paying attention to. First of all, please don't forget that the Department of Government Efficiency remains embedded in our government, sucking up our data and cutting programs that we care deeply about. But there's a bunch of other things that are going on as well. You have mentioned at least one of them, and that's this bill that the Trump administration is trying to wrestle through Congress at this point. Now, the House of Representatives passed the bill. It's an omnibus bill, which means it's got a whole bunch of stuff in it. It's over 1,000 pages long. It's sort of everything but the kitchen sink, and maybe even the kitchen sink. And what it does really quite dramatically is it cuts programs that the American people like, you know, like the Medicaid and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, what used to be food stamps. Basically, it cuts the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, way back. It cuts housing assistance. It cuts credits for things that help the environment. And this is one of the reasons that Elon Musk has turned against it, is because it cuts credits for electric vehicles, which he needs for Teslas, although that's not, he's got other contracts coming in. At the same time it does all that cutting, it also cuts taxes for the very wealthy and corporations, and adds more than $4 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years. And so this is a real sticking point for a lot of right-wing MAGA Republicans who don't want to see an increasing deficit. It's also a sticking point for a lot of business people who recognize that the bond markets are going to completely freak out about this. And in fact, if you remember, this is why the US government's credit was downgraded by Moody's a few weeks ago, is because of the real concern over the growing deficit. So it cuts taxes, and it also raises the debt ceiling. I've explained that to you before, but I don't think I need to bother to do that again now. So that bill passed the House under enormous pressure from Trump, but now it's in front of the Senate. A number of senators are vulnerable, and now that Americans are paying attention to the cuts that are in this bill, especially cuts to Medicaid, a lot of senators are feeling like this may not be the best thing to do in front of their constituents. So they're starting to scramble away from it. And this is a huge fight going on in the party, because Trump is insisting it has to pass. Musk is now saying, don't pass the bill. He's telling the Republicans, stick with me, don't pass that bill, because he doesn't like the expansion of the debt, he says. He also wants the EV credits. And a number of Republican senators recognize that this bill is underwater by more than 10 points, by double digits. And the more people hear about it, the less they like about it, because the idea of cutting both SNAP benefits, but also Medicaid, really threatens the existence, especially of rural hospitals, because a lot of them depend on Medicaid payments in order to stay viable for even non-Medicaid patients. So there's that bill that's hanging out there in this moment. But that's not all, of course. There are also still the tariffs. The tariffs that Trump seems to be applying willy-nilly, and he keeps insisting are doing wonderfully for the U.S. government. In fact, the numbers had came out within the last couple of days. I've lost track of what day it is, but they are in fact slowing down global growth as we expected, but they are also badly hurting U.S. growth. So U.S. growth in 2024 was about 2.8%, which is quite healthy. And by next year, it will be down to 1.6%, and then it will go down to 1.5%, fairly anemic if the tariffs stay where they are. At the same time, Trump has been begging Xi Jinping, the leader of China, to call him, to talk to him about tariffs. And Xi Jinping has been developing other markets and recognizes that Trump's in real hard shape over this. So he's been really being very coy about talking to Trump and working out the tariffs. So that's out there right at the time when Walmart is raising prices and the tariffs are starting to bite. So you're going to start to see inflation, although the US government has said it really can't track inflation as efficiently as it used to because of the cuts that the Trump administration has made to the government. But people are starting to feel the bite of the tariffs, and Trump can yell all he wants about how much money it's bringing in. In fact, any money that's coming in is coming from us. So we are those of us who consume, which is not the extremely wealthy people, are the ones paying those tariffs, and that's going to start to bite. So at the same time we have that going on, we also have the issue of immigration. And for all that Trump and his people keep insisting that what he is doing in immigration is popular, that's why he was voted into office. In fact, he's badly underwater on immigration as well, because a lot of people, remember I kept saying before the election that, he was promising everything to everyone, and you couldn't be both wet and dry at the same time. Well, a lot of people who voted for Trump truly thought that they were voting to get criminals removed from the country, not apparently realizing that we already had a system in place for that. But they thought that he was only going to get rid of murderers and rapists. And as they are taking, fourth graders and mothers, and, there's more and more evidence coming out that, in fact, the people they are rendering to prisons in other countries do not have criminal charges or criminal records. People are horrified because they recognize that if they can do that to individuals in this country who are protected under our Constitution does not say that citizens get due process. It says that persons get due process. If you can do that to an undocumented immigrant, you can do it to anyone. And that is something that's cutting really close to home, close to the bone, especially in rural areas where a lot of people have had run-ins with legal authorities simply because in bigger cities, the law enforcement officers have a lot more serious crime to deal with than they do in rural areas generally, where, most of us around here who live in rural areas know our law enforcement officers, often on a first name basis. So all of these things are hanging out there. And this fight between Trump and Musk, while it's entertaining, should not let you take your eyes off the bigger ball here, which is the transformation of our government from something that works for the good of the majority of Americans to an instrument for the enrichment of a very few wealthy, largely men. That's what's going on in this moment, and that's what you want to keep your eyes on the ball with. This explosion that we're seeing is very much about the control of the Republican Party, but it is also a sign of extraordinary weakness, in the White House. And you can prove this, you can tell this is happening by, for example, the degree to which Trump is screaming about Joe Biden. Joe Biden is not president any longer. He had a very successful run, and now he's not in the news any longer. He's been out of the White House now for 6 months. This economy is Trump's. The fighting is Trump's. The incompetent people in charge of departments, for example, that is all Trump, and it is all beginning to crumble. In this moment, I would urge you to keep speaking up. Keep calling people, keep talking about what you want to see out of your government going forward, because it's going to get worse. The crumbling, the fighting, the incompetence, the cost, all of those things are going to get worse over the course of this summer. And now is the time to make sure that those people who are trying to protect American democracy really speak up and really support those other people who are speaking up. So I hope that that helps you at least get through tonight's drama. I will confess I'm going to go watch more about it because it's a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? You can't help enjoying a little bit seeing this break happen when a number of us have been predicting it now for a very long time. So we'll see how this all plays out, and I will keep you abreast of developments as one last thing about it. When Musk said that that he was his big bombshell that Trump is in the Epstein files, we knew he was in the Epstein files. That's nothing new at all. In fact, Epstein left tapes saying that Trump was one of his best friends. I think that was a threat. I think he knows something about Trump and about Trump's something to do with Trump. And I think that was his way of reminding Trump that Musk has dirt on him. So that's one of the things that I'm going to be watching going forward. All right. Thank you for being here. And I will see you. I'm actually going to do an interview tomorrow with Gil Duran, who is a tech reporter and has a really good handle on what the tech bros are up to. So feel free to check in on that. Otherwise, it will be on, I'll post it both on Facebook and on my YouTube channel. And next week, I'm interviewing Pete Buttigieg as well. So stick around. There'll be more and more material coming up on the YouTube channel. Thank you for being here. Hey, folks, how are you? Hope it's warmer where you are than where I am. This has been a really cold spring. Morristown, New Jersey. There you go. Suburban Chicago. Up down the coast, Beth. I hope you're warmer than I am. Naperville. I grew up part-time in Wheaton, so I remember Naperville not very well. New Jersey, Pittsburgh. Oh, I love Pittsburgh. And Grand Rapids, Michigan is here. And now we've got Facebook, so I think we're all set to go. Let me jump in here. So everybody is asking questions about martial law. And I want to just say right now, stop it. Trump is very effectively manipulating the way people think about him and about this moment. This is a moment to be very frightened, for sure. And there are a number of things we have to do. But let me lay out to you what this country looked like just a week ago. All right? Think about it. Trump's tariffs were already a disaster. They had badly cut into world trade and into American economic growth. Those numbers have continued bad throughout this week, with economists saying that the world economic growth will be cut in half because of them. And of course, the biggest loser is the United States of America, who was on track to have economic growth of about 2.8% this year, the same as 2024, which is good. 3 is, something that presidents cheer about. 2.8% is very respectable. It's a good number, and that's what we had in 2024. Now the economists are cutting that down to 1.4% because of Trump's trade walls, because of these extreme tariffs. So they are not working. They are not popular. And he promised that he would hammer out 90 deals in 90 days. We have this many. And at the same time, there was an article in the New York Times today about how the U.S. is trying to negotiate with China for the magical return of the system we had before Trump put the tariffs on. Literally, they're trying to negotiate to get back to where we were. So that was on the menu a week ago. So, of course, was the fight between billionaire Elon Musk and Donald Trump, which was really drawing a lot of attention to the Department of Government Efficiency and the fact that it still looks as if it was an illegal organization. And it really didn't accomplish anything. Remember Trump saying to one of his aides, "So was it all bullshit?" And it appears to have been all bullshit. And Musk coming out against the Trump administration's One Big Beautiful Bill, which I'll talk about in a second, started this embarrassing juvenile war between the two of them that had them threatening each other and had everybody sort of glued to what is going to happen next, but also had a number of Trump loyalists talking about the fact that Musk claimed that Trump was deep into Jeffrey Epstein's log, which is not a surprise to anybody who's been following the story. Epstein talked about how he was very close to Trump. They enjoyed a lot of the same things. Trump said the same thing about Trump, even added that they liked women on the younger side and so on. But if you listened carefully to that struggle between the two of them, which has cooled off a lot now, and Musk appears to be trying to make nice with Trump again, probably recognizing that his entire business depends on federal contracts. It also seemed to me that there was an implied threat that Musk knew a lot more than just about the Epstein files. And if you think about what Trump and Musk got up to together with the Department of Government Efficiency, with the 2024 election, and so on, it did not seem like that was a threat that Trump would take lightly. You know, he wouldn't criticize, even when Musk came out and said he should be impeached, agreed with somebody who said Trump should be impeached. Trump just sort of backed away from that, which said to me he doesn't really dare to take on Musk. So we were talking about that a week ago. We were also talking about immigration. Trump is underwater on immigration. And when people like me talk about somebody being underwater on something, what that means is that more people disapprove of the behavior than approve of the behavior. So when you hear that term, well, that's what it means. When someone says they're underwater, it simply means that more people don't like what a president is doing than do like it. And for all that Trump and his loyalists have insisted he had a mandate, and this is what people voted for, in fact, many MAGA voters believed that they were voting to send criminals out of the country. And by criminals, they meant those who had committed violent crimes like rape or murder. But what they didn't seem to be able to grasp was that at least some of the people in Trump's orbit were defining all immigrants, all undocumented immigrants as criminals by virtue of the fact they had broken immigration laws. Now, those are not felonies, by the way, but they are, of course, doing these huge sweeps now that sort of by definition take out the people who aren't criminals, because they're the people who show up to court cases, for example, and show up to work at Home Depot and show up to their jobs and have been here a long time. That, by the way, is a long pattern in American history. We used to see it with the army attacks on indigenous Americans, that when there were struggles between the army and and bands of indigenous warriors, almost always the first people to get rounded up and often massacred were the non-combatants, the people who were peacefully encamped somewhere, because they were easy. It just kills you when you read that period in our history, because every time you see that kind of an order, you know exactly who's going to get it. And that is kind of what we're seeing a reprise of now, with the administration going after immigrants who have been here a long time and have integrated into society, or now including those who are here legally, who are being swept up, as well as the people who are undocumented. Americans don't like that. That's not what they thought they were signing up for. And again, his numbers were underwater on that, meaning that more people disliked that than liked it. All right, so if that's where we were a week ago, what happened? We know now, there's a lot of people who've reported on this, but the Wall Street Journal had a new piece on it today, that Stephen Miller, who is the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, he is the one who's always out in front of the cameras talking about immigration and who is himself a white nationalist. That is, he isn't just talking about deporting people who are undocumented. He wants to get rid of people whom he considers to be people of color, who don't belong in the United States. He is a white nationalist. He wants to make America what he considers a white country. And that's a really hard term for a historian, because we know that whiteness, who gets to be called white and doesn't get to be called white, is socially constructed. So the idea that America was ever white is just, it's very hard to even articulate that sentence, because it makes zero sense to someone like me. A reminder that there was a long period when Irish Americans were not considered white. So this idea somehow that he's going to create a world that looks less, I guess, like his fantasy, although he, of course, is I think a second generation American, it's just a weird thing. Anyway, Miller wants to get rid of not only undocumented immigrants, but immigrants who are here legally, and immigrants who have had children here who are birthright citizens. So if you look at the numbers that Trump is now throwing around, that includes birthright children, which is an attack on our history back to 1868, reconfirmed in 1898 with the Wong Kim Ark decision. So Stephen Miller appears to be the one calling the shots over immigration, and he insisted that the administration was going to be able to deport or to render. Okay, so deportation means you take somebody who's in the country and you send them back to their home country. That's deportation. But if you take somebody who's in the country and send them to a third country to be imprisoned, that's called rendering them. That is rendition. And that's an important distinction, because if you're sent back to the country you came from, okay, it may not have been what was in your cards, but you have kin and you have job prospects and you're safe, or you're at least familiar with the turf that you're in. If you are sent to CCOT, which is the terrorist prison in El Salvador, without a trial and without being accused of anything, you're in real trouble. And that's called rendition. And that's an important distinction, because the U.S. is not simply deporting people. It is deliberately rendering individuals to countries that they are not from. So the Venezuelans who ended up at CCOT, for example, ended up in El Salvador, and there were a number of Asian immigrants who were sent or attempted to be sent to South Sudan. And then there were others that were sent to other places as well, or were attempted to be sent to other places. I'm at this point a little vague about how many have actually been sent and how many were simply threatened to be sent. But I want to emphasize that those are different things. All right, so Miller wants to get rid of 1 million people. By the way, the statistics show that about 4% of our workforce is undocumented immigrant. And that's a lot, okay? And they're mostly concentrated in agriculture, construction, and I'm going to go with hospitality, but there's another one as well that I'm not coming up with. So that's a big proportion of our workforce. And he wants to get rid of 1 million people a year. But in fact, this is going to be really difficult for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons that you have to have your head around is that if you remember that big surge of migrants across the southern border of the U.S. during the Biden administration, that was really driven by the fact that the U.S. economy was crazy good. Like, because of the way that the Biden administration handled the economy, U.S. economic growth was extraordinary. If you remember, it was impossible. There were help wanted signs everywhere. It was impossible to find workers. Certainly here in Maine, lots of places had to cut back their hours because they simply didn't have people to work. And what that meant was we were sort of a vacuum sucking up people who had come from other countries to countries in South America that were then sort of, I always think of them sort of like the seeds coming out of an orange if you squeeze it fast. They were kind of squeezed out and coming across the US border where there was a real demand for their labor. Now, of course, that the US economy has faltered so dramatically and other economies have caught up, those numbers just aren't there anymore. So in order to get rid of this many people and to push this many people out, Miller really wanted the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, to send more people away every day. They were running at about 650 people a day, and he wanted them to be at 3,000 people a day. Again, something that was way over their capacity. Well, what are you going to do if you want those kind of numbers? You're going to go to places like Home Depot, where there are people waiting to be picked up for jobs, or to the industries in which undocumented Americans are working. So this is precisely what Miller demanded, and it is what ICE began to do. Now, that being said, ICE began in Los Angeles. And this was, they were doing raids elsewhere, but this big push has been in Los Angeles. Why Los Angeles? First of all, because Miller sees it as like this hotbed of crime and corruption, although in fact, LA is actually a very safe city. It's much safer. California is much safer than Oklahoma, for example, which has a murder rate 40 times as high as that in LA. It's one of the highest in the country. And similarly, I just looked at the statistics. Alabama is 3 times as high as LA. All right, so 40% higher, and then 3 times as much as California is. So they're trying to portray California as this hotbed of corruption and so on, in part because it's a big democratic state. It has one of the largest economies in the world. And Trump would really like to make it bow down to him. So what happened was that on last Friday, the ICE began to do sweeps in LA at a couple of places. A clothing store was one of them. It had done a few before that at restaurants, but over the course of last week, ICE was also taking into custody people and their families who showed up for court dates, and holding them in basements of federal buildings. When this happened, these people thought they were just going to their appointments, and they ended up in custody. So their lawyers and their families, they were denied access to those people, but they started milling around those buildings to say, we want contact with these people. They should be able to talk to lawyers and so on. So these raids started to happen at the same time you've got these protesters outside these federal buildings. And we're not talking a lot of people. We're talking a few hundred people, a couple hundred people in some of them, and it's a very limited area. So what happened was ICE began on Friday to be very aggressive and really to try and stir things up. And if you're interested in that, when they arrested labor leader David Huerta, a very popular labor leader, he has now been charged with federal crime of obstructing an officer. But if you actually read the complaint, which is available online, what he did was he sat on a sidewalk and he walked on the sidewalk. He didn't hit anybody. He didn't chain himself to anything. He talked to people. He even shouted, it appears anyway from the complaint. But he gets tackled by federal officers and who hit his head on the ground, and he actually ends up briefly in the hospital. And then he was in custody, and now he's been charged with a federal crime. But you can see that the escalation here is very much on the side of the people who are answering to Trump. And that's important. ICE answers to Trump, not to the military, which I'm going to tell you more about in a second. When this happened, Trump and people around him kept talking about the protesters, causing this terrible problem in Los Angeles. And, there were some fires. It's not clear that those weren't set off by the flashbang grenades or the tear gas canisters that the agents were handling. But that got shut down pretty quickly. And nonetheless, Trump federalized the National Guard. He said, I'm going to send in the National Guard. And he sent in first 2,000 and then 4,000 of California National Guard members to, as he said, support ICE and local law enforcement. But neither the governor nor the mayor of LA wanted those reinforcements and said they didn't need them, that this was a deliberate attempt to escalate things. On top of that, Trump then said he was going to send in 700 Marines. This was yesterday. And now, of course, today, he threatened that if anybody protests during the Saturday parade, although I think he got the date of it wrong, the Saturday parade, they will be met with huge force. So let's just untangle here what he's doing. Trump is trying, first of all, to suppress dissent against himself and against his administration and make it look like he is in power. But this is actually from a real position of weakness. It's a dangerous time. It's a frightening time. But a couple of things. First, California has already sued to say you cannot federalize the National Guard under these circumstances. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But have you watched the Marines? One of the things that I always wish people would do more of is, I think if you are not involved in the military, you tend to see it as sort of monolithic. And certainly for people who remember times when the American military has not behaved particularly well, there is a tendency to assume the worst of the military. But in fact, although the military is like anybody else, they got good guys and they got bad guys, and good women and good, I didn't mean to make that gender, good people and bad people. The military has a very, very strong legal code and code of honor. And they don't want to be put in a situation where they will be acting in ways that are not supported by those military codes and regulations. And if you've noticed, the last I checked anyway, the Marines had not deployed because the Pentagon is saying, we don't have any legal basis for being on those streets. And we don't want to be, not more specifically, the officers in charge don't want to be in the position of giving an illegal order. So they're trying to find a way, and you can see the administration today said, oh, we need them to protect federal buildings. But there haven't been any attacks on federal buildings. And they're saying they haven't to have them for protection for the ICE agents, but in fact, it's the ICE agents who are being aggressive. So the military right now, and certainly the Marines, who have, again, their very storied history of their own, they don't want to be in the middle of this. And again, it's also worth remembering that at least until the Trump administration, about 40% of our people in uniform were women or people of color. And, you know, this idea that everybody is in the military is chomping at the bit to stand behind Trump, I think is incorrect. And certainly the leadership doesn't want to do that, even if they might vote Republican, because they have regulations and they have, you know, heartfelt dedication to our Constitution that makes them very uneasy about doing that. So now we have Trump saying, I'm going to meet any kind of protests in Washington, D.C. with force. What does that mean? I mean, literally, what does that mean? Is the military, which, by the way, under the Posse Comitatus Act of 1787, cannot be used as law enforcement against American citizens, American people, unless Trump invokes the Insurrection Act of 1807, saying there's an insurrection. Are they going to respond to that? I wouldn't. So what Trump is doing is really dangerous. It is really frightening, and it needs to be pushed back on. But it is also an attempt to project the idea that he has power, that he plans to take simply by declaring he has it. And there are people standing in the way of that. And there's also logistics standing in the way of that. So again, at this point, we have 4,000 National Guard troops that have theoretically been deployed to Los Angeles. They don't have food. They don't have housing. They don't have porta potties. You know, they're sleeping on cement ground because nobody did the logistics for actually moving people there, in part because Trump has put into office and into positions in the government people who don't know what they're doing. You know, this is something that should have been coordinated, and it was not. So before we get like, oh my God, he's going to declare martial law, remember that he is trying to convince you that he is in control. And there's an awful lot of stuff that's not going very well for him, including the fact that the American people do not support turning the military out and turning the National Guard, federalizing the National Guard in LA. They don't like that. They're not standing behind that. They're actually against him doing that. So what is he up to? Remember, behind all of that, oh, let me just tell you a little bit more about that. I mentioned the Posse Comitatus Act and the Insurrection Act. One of the ways that Trump is getting away with doing the things that he is doing is by declaring emergencies. There are a number of ways in our system in which we have created little loopholes in case a real emergency happens. And Trump has simply declared emergencies right and left. We have an economic emergency. Now we have an emergency in LA. We have all these different emergencies that Congress could stop. The reason there are these loopholes is there are mechanics for Congress to say, dude, there's no emergency here. But the Republicans in the House of Representatives have taken that off the table. They pulled something that I've explained before. They've taken that off the table to say, we're good with whatever he wants to do. So he's doing a lot under these emergencies. And now you've asked, what happens if he declares martial law? The president cannot declare martial law. Congress has to declare martial law. Again, he can invoke the Insurrection Act, but only under limited circumstances. And what we're really looking at here is a question of how much the Republicans in Congress are willing to let him get away with, and how much Americans are willing to say, oh my God, he says he's in control, so I have to believe he is. He's not in control of these different mechanics. And similarly, in terms of the upcoming 2026 elections that people have asked about, the United States has never canceled an election. It has never postponed an election. That has never happened. Even during the Civil War, some people suggested to Abraham Lincoln that he should put off the 1864 presidential election. And he said that would be a sign that we have lost everything, because we're losing our democracy if we do that. So I don't believe he's going to try. He mentioned canceling the 2020 election, if you remember, and people shot that down in a hurry. He might try to do that. I think far more likely is what we are seeing in places like Texas, and that is Trump trying to get the Texas legislature to redistrict the state in his favor before the 2026 elections. And I think you're going to see a lot of ways in which the administration tries to game the system so that Trump's going to win, or the Republicans are going to win, even if the people don't want him to win. So what's on the table right now is this one big, beautiful bill, as they are calling it. This is a really, really big deal. The reason it is a one bill and not a series of bills, and I've editorialized before about how I hate it when Congress does these giant bills. I just think I won't editorialize it again. But the reason it's one bill and not a series of bills is because the Republicans know how unpopular this bill is. They're trying to get it through Congress under what's called budget reconciliation. And budget reconciliation only requires a simple majority. So it can't be filibustered in the Senate, where they know they wouldn't get these measures through. That even still, that more than 1,000-page bill is so full of stuff that Americans don't like that already Americans the Republicans are backing away from things like the dramatic Medicaid cuts in it. They're having to back away from certain things in it. So if you've noticed, there are a number of times in the last couple of days where MAGA Republicans have said the only way to push back against what they are calling riots in LA, they are not riots in LA, they are protests. If there's rioting, it's on the other side, although we have not hit a police riot yet. I shouldn't have thrown that out. And maybe won't. They have said the only way to regain control of Los Angeles is to pass their bill, because it's got significantly more funding for border protection and for the Defense Department in it. And those two things cannot be separated. Part of what's going on is an attempt of Trump to get the upper hand again and to say, the only way that you can get your country back, which he literally talked about today in a speech at Fort Bragg, is to get Los Angeles back, is to pass the bill that I am so desperate to get through Congress. What does that bill do? It cuts taxes for the very wealthy. and it raises the debt ceiling so that we can borrow to pay for those taxes. It also dramatically cuts services. So those things are absolutely entwined. And when you hear about martial law and he's now going to push back on protesters and all this, that's frightening stuff. More frightening is that very few Republicans are standing up against it, although Susan Collins today from Maine did say she did not accept the deployment of Marines. And that's a really interesting harbinger for two reasons. One, because Susan Collins is never the first person out there. She's always the third. So you wonder who the other two people is she knows are ahead of her on that. She could have broken her pattern, but when Susan Collins finally steps up, it's because she knows she's not the first one out there. At least it always has been in the past. It's also important because she's going to be in a very tight race for re-election in 2026, and she clearly is reading the writing on the wall in Maine, and her district of Maine is red. She's reading the writing on the wall in Maine and saying, Mainers don't like this, and I better take a stand against it. So she is somebody who's spoken up. I wish more Republicans were speaking up. But when you look at, the threats he's making and so on, remember what they have done is they have taken our eye off of all the things that are going wrong in this administration. And they're suddenly trying to make him look good again. And they're suddenly trying to get people behind him again. And one of the things that really jumps out, again, to me in this moment, is he can't finish a sentence. Today, in front of the people at Fort Bragg, he talked about America winning World War I against the Germans and the Japanese. And, he just makes these statements and he's all over the map. The White House is no longer publishing transcripts of anything he says because they're so bonkers. He's not a stable candidate. And this is one thing that Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has been calling out. He has been rapid responding all the stuff that's happening in California. And he keeps hammering on the fact that Trump, for example, said they had a phone call and they did not. And of course, Newsom had receipts. So that all those things are going on. I hope I'm calming you down because this is scary. It's bad stuff. And in fact, a lot of people asked, has the government ever called out the troops against the American people before? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. But interestingly enough, the reason we have what's known as the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 is because the government called out the army against labor organizers and labor protesters in the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. And across the board, Congress people were like, you cannot have an administration using the army against its people for what were essentially its donors. And so after the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, we do continue to see troops mobilized under the Insurrection Act pretty dramatically in the late 19th century. But you no longer see this idea of troops being able to be used against people. Although, interestingly enough, Dick Cheney worked very hard to get rid of the Posse Comitatus Act. The reason I know so much about it is the Congressional Research Board, that's not the name of it, the people who do congressional research, pulled every law and every instance of the use of Posse Comitatus for him. And I read it because I was working on a project that involved Posse Comitatus. And just again, rabbit hole, sorry about this, but one of the things that really hurts Indigenous Americans in the late 19th century is that the army cannot be used against the U.S. citizens who are stealing their horses and taking their grazing rights. And this is one of the reasons we get the rise of Indigenous police forces, because only they can stand against the Anglos who are coming in and taking especially their grass. It's not land in the late 19th century that matters so much as grass and stealing their horses. Totally rabbit hole, but I think it's interesting how laws play out. All right. So where am I going to leave you with this? Protests. We're going to see so many protests this summer, and we're going to see the administration pushing back on the protests, and it's going to be dangerous. Why do we protest in the United States of America? And I can't speak for any other countries. That's why I always limit that. Protests indicate whether or not a government is legitimate. That's why they matter. You are not protesting to get rid of a certain senator. You are not protesting to say, I want a different law. You are protesting because the people who are in power are putting in place policies that you do not support. And I guess it could be a single law. But what you're really doing is you're saying to your neighbors who are not involved, I don't support this government and you shouldn't either. That's a different thing than fighting against ICE, for example. And the reason I make that distinction is because in the protests, there's a lot of fighting going on social media right now about what those protests should look like, because there are a lot of things going on that are horrific. The separation of children, the rendition of these poor souls to these infamous prisons. I mean, I could just go on at great length. But as angry as those things make you, in American politics, what changes things is getting those people who are not otherwise on your side, either because they're apathetic or they're a little doubtful or whatever, to join you. And the way that you do that is by looking non-threatening, by demonstrating that you stand for American values that they share. And so I actually have an American pin on underneath my coat. It's really cold in here. I urge everybody to carry the symbols of American democracy, to wear pins, to carry American flags, to really deck yourself out as the people who own American democracy, because we do. And to really recognize that what the protests are designed to do is to say, we are America. This is the value. These are the values that America should stand on. Please join us. That doesn't mean you're going to agree with everything that the people around you think or that they are with you. And as I say, we can work all that out in the wash on the other side of this. But I'm saying all this because people sometimes mistake the idea that protests are designed to fight back against the system and the people in the system. In fact, the minute in the United States anyway, that you start to demonstrate violence, you lose all those people you need on your team because they were kind of apathetic to begin with. And they just don't want to have any part of it. One of the theories behind people like Dr. King was that nonviolence is important. He had a number of reasons, but people like me look at it and say nonviolence is important because that brings those people on board. The minute they see violence, they don't want any part of it. So the protests on our side to take back American democracy must be nonviolent. They should be as American as they possibly can be in their symbolism and, Declaration of Independence, multiculturalism, all of those things are who we are. And the recognition that the fight here is for public opinion. It's to demonstrate that the Trump administration is not popular. And that's, of course, why he's determined not to have those protests on June 14th, because he wants everyone to just see him, when the reality is he's deeply unpopular. The cost of this parade is infuriating a lot of people. Hey, the cost of sending the troops to Los Angeles at this point is pegged out at $134 million. There's a budget from the Department of Homeland Security for advertising to make people feel better about Trump. All that stuff are things that Americans don't like. So going into this moment, when you're thinking about things you can do, recognize that the war, and I mean that is going to happen for the next several months, is for legitimacy, is for the idea that we are the Americans, and those people who are ripping children away from their parents are not. They are not representing our values. So it's just kind of a different lens to look at protesting, but it also means that the protesting that goes on in the streets should look a certain way, but you don't have to just protest in the streets at certain times. You need to be anywhere where the discussion of American values, and by that I mean book banning and school boards and education and art and science. There's all kinds of programs to stand up for science this summer. You need to be in those places. And you also need to be on social media saying to people what it is that's happening that is personally affecting you. You know, the cuts to cancer research, for example, the cuts to the weather service, the cuts to science, the many different ways in, or the, here's another one that somebody brought up to me today. The people who are deployed and the families of the people who are deployed don't want to be in this position. That's not why they signed up for the military. That's not why they have taken the hits that they have in their lives. You know, they don't want to be political pawns. They're there to defend the United States of America. You know, the degree to which we can speak up about that will help to convince people who are not that involved right now to get involved, because we need their voices. We need at least 3.5% of the American population, and we need continually to demonstrate that those people in power, those vicious people in power who are also showing their incompetence, are not the people that we want to have carry this country forward. So I hope that gives you a little bit of calmness anyway. It's scary. I'm not going to deny it's scary. We're all exhausted. Things just keep coming. But it's really important to recognize the difference between what Trump is trying to project and what's real. And the reality is what's going to get us out of this, because it will enable us to puncture that false image. And again, you can see this all over social media. There's all kinds of bots and trolls working nonstop overtime to try and convince us that the protesters in LA are violent. And this is very much a psychological operation. We need to push back with that same kind of fervor. All right. I hope that's enough for today. I'm going to go back to writing and, keep the faith, because it's going to be a hell of a ride. But we have no choice but to move forward. And I'm ever so proud to be doing this with you all. I'll see you soon.